So good morning. Today's daf is Yevamot daf Tet Zayin. We left off at the top of Tet Zayin Amud Aleph. Let me share my screen. No, that's not. Here we go. And so yesterday we finished the 13th and final attempt to prove that Beit Shammai actually acted consistent with their rulings, which is, of course, what you probably would have said absent any proof that of course they ruled the halacha was a particular way, that they would actually follow that. But we wanted to try and make sure that in fact that was the case, and in order to highlight the extent to which it was really quite remarkable that the families of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel would be willing to marry one another. There was essentially a sense of trust between them that they would enable each of them to fulfill to avoid sinning according to their own opinions, even though it would actually result in various families thinking that each other were even potentially mamzerim. So in any event, and in particular, in the last brisa that we quoted an excerpt from the brisa that said that in the days of Rabbi Dosim and Harkness, the co-wife of a daughter was permitted to the brothers. So again, just using names to make us sure we understand the example. So Reuven's daughter Dinah married Reuven's brother Levi, who was also married to Leah. Levi died without children. Reuven was permitted to marry Leah and Yibum, despite the fact that Reuven's daughter Dinah was her co-wife. So again, in our Mishnah that opened up our Masechet, that was absolutely prohibited, and indeed it would be subject to the penalty of kares. And rather, the co-wife would actually go essentially free in that situation and be able to marry whomever she wanted. There was no requirement for Yibum or Chalitza in that situation. And yet here we have a situation where in fact the co-wife was permitted. So that's the situation. And we see that in fact somebody actually ruled according to Beit Shammai. So now we're going to turn to the Gemara, and we're going to begin by quoting the rest of the brisa, which deals with the aftermath of this ruling, because the rabbis are going to be upset. How could somebody have ruled in the time of Rabbi Joseph ben Harkness according to Beit Shammai and not according to Beit Hillel? Because the halacha was known to be like Beit Hillel already at that time. So now we are 3 lines down, third word from the end of the line, Gufa, right? So Gufa, let's take a look at that text that we just quoted. What was the whole text? Bimei Rabbi Yosef ben Harkness, with the days of Rabbi Yosef ben Harkness, Hitiru Saras Habas La'achad, the daughters of the wife, the co-wives of the daughter were permitted to be married to the brother of the deceased husband. So v'haya hadavar kasha l'chachamim, but now in the language that we have not quoted earlier, but this was a very difficult thing for the chachamim in that day. Because first Rabbi Dosa was a great chacham, a very intelligent person, a good scholar, a Torah scholar. The Einav but at the same time he had because of his eyes, he had stopped coming to the Beit Midrash. Presumably he had difficulty seeing, as we'll see in a moment. He's unable to recognize people. So Amru, so they said in the Beit Midrash, this is based on the Masoras Hashas, changing the language a little bit. Amru mi yelech v'yodiu, who's going to go and tell him about the fact that we disagree with his ruling? So Amar lahen Rabbi Yeshua ani yelech. Rabbi Yeshua says, I'm going to go. Rabbi Yeshua was one of the older scholars at the time, and he was the Av Beis Din, and so he offers to go. So Acharav me, and who goes? So all right, so who's going to go after him or with him, as we'll see? So Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah So Rabbi Elazar said Ben Azariah offers to go. Ba'acharav me, and who's going to go after him? So Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva offered that he would go. So halchu va'amdu al pesach beso. So they all go. They're going together, and they stand outside the house. Nichnasa shevchaso amralo. So the maid goes in and lets Rabbi Dosa know that they're that Rabbi Chachmei Yisrael ban etzlecha. My master. There are Chachmei Yisrael. There are the Chachamim from Israel that they have come to visit you. So amralo yikansu, let them in. Okay, so nichnasu, they come in. Tafsu Rabbi Yoshua. So they Voshivahu al mita zahav. So he recognizes that Rabbi Yeshua was there, and he sits him on a nice golden couch. Amar lo, Rabbi Yeshua says to Rabbi Dosa. So Rabbi, and morla talmiducha acher v'yashev. You let your other students come and sit. So Amar lo. So Rabbi Yeshua asks him. So me who? Who is it? So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So the Rabbi Dosa answers that it was Rabbi Yeshua, answers that it was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So Amar, so Rabbi Dosa says, V'yeshlo ben Azariah l'chaveirenu. I'm sorry, V'yeshlo bein l'Azariah chaveirenu. Did our friend, my friend or our friend Azariah have a son? With regard to him, this pasuk was said. So nara iti v'gamza kante v'lo ra'iti tzadik ne'azav v'zaru mevakesh lechem, as we say at the end of benching, that I've been young and I've grown old, but I've not seen a righteous person, a righteous man, forsaken, nor his children begging for bread. So the idea is that Azariah was a very wealthy person, and so the idea is that not only was Azariah supposedly wealthy, but now he had an inheritor, namely Elazar ben Azariah, who was able to take over for his father and be able to lead his family and be able to continue the wealthy situation. So Tvasovo Shivo al mitashel zahav, and so he was also sat on a golden couch, and I think it's the Marsha explains that the idea is that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was the Nasi, and so as a result, which is actually even above the Av Beis Din, which is what Rabbi Yeshua was, and so as a result, the two of them were sat on nice golden couches. So Amar Lo, and so now, of course, there's one more person that is still around and hasn't been introduced. So now let's introduce him. So Rabbi Amar, Rabbi, and Moral Talmidcha Acher v'yashev. What about there's one more. So Amar Lo, Umiyu, who is he? So Akiva ben Yosef. So this is Akiva ben Yosef. So Amar Lo, Rabbi Dosa says to Rabbi Akiva, Atahu Akiva ben Yosef, Shishimcha Lake Misofa Alama at Sofo. You're famous. Everybody knows who you are from one end of the world to the other. So Shave B'ni Shave, come sit down. Kamoscha Yirbu Yisrael. May there be many more like you in among Israel. So Hitchil Misabvin Oso Bahalacha. So they began to discuss, circling him with different halakha questions, because they didn't want to jump into the topic that was very sensitive. So they wanted to get to the eventually. So Ache Gil Saras Abbas, finally they asked him about this question about the co-wife of a daughter. So Amrulay, they asked him, Saras Abbas Mahu, what's the law connection with the co-wife of a daughter? So Amrullah had machlokas Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. It's everybody knows that it's a machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So halacha k'divrei mi. So they ask him, all right, we know that too, but whose opinion do you follow? So Amar lahen halacha k'Beis Hillel. The halacha is like Beis Hillel. So Amar lay. 1 second. One second. We heard that it may have been said in your name that you said the halacha was like Beis Shammai. So Amar lahem dosa shematem o ben harkenes shematem. You 1 second. Did you hear that it was me specifically, or did you just hear that it was somebody who was the son of Harkenes? So Amar lay chaye Rabbi. Stam Shamana. We didn't have any details as to who said it. We only knew that it was just a general statement, and we thought it was you. So Amar Lahem, Katan Yeshi. I have a younger brother, Bechor Satan, who he is the firstborn of Satan. Here meaning an adversary. So he's a real adversary. You have to be careful about him. Yonasan Shmo, his name is Yonasan. And he is from the students of Shammai. Now you got to be careful. Don't because he'll cut you down in any discussion of halacha. Because he's got 300 arguments why the daughter of the co-wife of a daughter should be permitted. So Abal Meid Aniya Alai Shemaim Va'aretz, but I'm going to call to the heavens and earth as my witness. Sh'al Medocha Zo Yashav Chagai Navi. That on this Medocha, a mortar, that's where Chagai sat, the Chagai the prophet sat. Va'amar Shlosha Dvarim, and he made 3 rulings. He issued 3 rulings. 1, Sarasa Surah, that the co-wife of a daughter is prohibited. So Ammon Umoav, so that was rule number 1. Rule number 2 is Ammon Umoav Ma'asrin Meiser Ane B'Shvius. So to understand this, we have to back up and just note that the halachos of Meiser and Petrumas and Meisers don't apply outside the land of Israel. Now, we'll deal with it in more detail in a moment, but the land of Ammon and Moab is not on the western side of the Jordan River, and so it's not wasn't part of the formal land potentially that when Israel came back to the land of Israel after the first exile to build the second base of Mikdash, and so as a result, it wasn't considered part of Israel with respect to Trumas and Maestros. However, the rabbi said that because of its proximity and because Jews were living there, that they would still subject it to Trumas and Maestros, midrabanan. But the question then became, what about in the Shemitah year? What would they do? And the answer is, would they treat it as a Shemitah, meaning would they have to let the land lay fallow? And the answer is no. No, you don't have to let the land lay fallow. All right, but so in that case, presumably you would want them to take Trumas and Maestros even during the 7th year. Well, there's of course one aspect of Maestros that differs every year. In the 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 5th year, we take Meiser Sheni, that gets brought up to Yerushalayim. And in the 3rd and 6th year, you take Meiser Ani, that's given to a poor person. So we have 2 different options for what this additional Meiser would be done. Of course, Truma goes to the Kohanim, Meiser Rishon goes to the Leviim. So what would happen with this additional Meiser? What would it be done? And so the answer is, so in the lands of Ammon Umoav, Ma'asrin Meiser Ani B'Shvius, in the 7th year, they would give Meiser Ani. So that's how they would handle it. So that's the second law that Chagai the Navi detailed while sitting on this particular seat. Umakablan Gerim min HaKarduyim umin HaTarmodim, and that we should accept converts from the Karduyim and the Tarmodim. Now, the question is who are these people? So we're going to deal with that in a moment, but I'll give you the answer now. They were people that we'll see involved, were descendants of intermarriage. And so as a result, there was a question as to whether if a Jewish woman marries a non-Jewish man. So we know in modern halacha, obviously in the Bible time, it's not clear exactly how it would be. Indeed, it seems like if a Jewish man marries a non-Jewish woman, that potentially the children would be Jewish. But in any event, in the rabbinic age, certainly a Jewish woman marrying a non-Jewish man, the children are considered Jewish. And so then the question becomes, okay, well, is there some kind of pagam? Is there some kind of defect in this child that would suggest that people shouldn't marry that person? And so the answer is that no, there is no defect. They're not considered a mamzer. And so as a result, we are allowed to accept people who live in these areas to convert to Judaism, because of course they don't actually act as Jews, and so they may not even be Jewish, but therefore, so we decided that they are allowed. We don't have a concern that maybe they are considered mamzerim, and therefore we shouldn't allow them. So we say no, we'll allow them to convert if they want to do so. So okay, so now we continue with another aspect of the brisa. So Tana learned in a brisa when they about this story of Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva going to visit Rabbi Dosa. So when they came in, they all came in through one door. When they left out of three doors. So the question is why did they leave out of three doors? And Tosfos offers us two different potential answers. I personally like the second answer better, but let's take a look and see. In second Tosfos and Tevzayin Amral, Yatsu begimel psachim. They went out through three doors. Shaloyim se'em kulam yachad. The idea was that they didn't want to meet Yonasan ben Horkanas all at once, because if they did, v'yakbedem b'halachot v'yitztarchu likvoa halacha kamoso. Right, so they would have a beit din among the three of them, and if they got convinced by Rabbi Yonasan ben Horkanas that in fact the halacha was like Beis Shammai, they might have to actually come to the conclusion of Beis Shammai. So inami yatzu begimel psachim kedei sheyimtzeu v'yishmeu tshuvaso, or alternatively they went out through three doors in order to try and find Yonasan ben Horkanas, that they all were trying to resolve this dispute, because the idea is that we want to try and align and come to a single conclusion and find compromise wherever possible. So what ended up happening? So they all went out the different doors. So Pagababa Rabbi Akiva, he met Rabbi Akiva, Akshileva Okme. So of course Rabbi Akiva, challenged, or he Rabbi Yonasan ben Horkanas challenged Rabbi Akiva, and of course Okme, he beat him. So Amra Lo, Rabbi Yonasan said to him, Ata hu Akiva sheshimcha holek misov ha'olam v'ad sofo. You're the guy whose name it goes from one end. You're famous. Ashrecha shezachisa l'shem. You're very lucky that you got that, to have that kind of reputation. But dayan lo higata l'roe vakar. You still haven't even gotten to the level of a cattle herder. And Amar lo Rabbi Akiva v'afilu l'roe tzon. I'm not even a roe tzon. I'm not even a sheep herder. Now, there's a variety of different possible explanations for what this exchange really means, but the bottom line is that, or the simplest, in my opinion, is that these different kind of shepherds were known to not be the most honest people, and so as a result, what Rabbi Yonasan is saying is, look, you're not, your quality of your arguments is such that you are not even a cattle herder. And Rabbi Akiva recognized that, in fact, he still had a lot of room to grow. And so as a result, he was saying that he's not even a sheep herder. And the idea is that all these shepherds, would have to lesser or greater degrees a willingness to allow their flocks to graze on land that it wasn't theirs. And cattle herders would be more careful than sheep herders. And so from the perspective of saying that Rabbi Akiva was a sheep herder, he was saying that, look, I am not, in fact, of the same quality as you in connection with this discussion. So that's the end of the brisas that discussed in detail this whole experience. And now we can continue by noting we're going to go back and discuss the second and the third laws of the three laws taught by Haggai. So let's take a look. So Amonu Moav Ma'asrin Meiser Ani B'Shviyas. So again, we said that that in the lands of Ammon and Moab, the Jewish people who have property there should take a Meiser Ani in the 7th year. Again, they would take Meiser, Trumas and Meiser every year. But in the 7th year, when the people in Israel proper would not be planting at all, they would be allowed to plant because this wasn't considered Israel. But they would need to, but they would still be required to give Trumas and Meisers. And we needed to know that the kind of additional Meiser that they give in that year is Meiser Ani, not Meiser Sheni. It's not the Meiser that you bring up to Yerushalayim. The Amar Mar. So and what's the reason? So Harbe Krokim, Kavshu Ole Mitzrayim. So there were a bunch of cities that were conquered when the Jewish people left Egypt, right? Below Kavshu Ole Bavel. But those when the people left Bavel, they were unable to conquer them. And so specifically, that's the land of Ammon and Moab. Ukadusha Rishona Kitchelish Shaita. Now the first sanctification when the Jewish people conquered those lands, that only was a time that was for a limited amount of time, meaning as long as the Jewish people had possession of those lands and controlled those lands and ruled over those lands. So then it would be treated like Eretz Yisrael. And so there would even be Shemitah. You would have to leave the land fallow in the 7th year. But Velo Kitchelah Zulovo, but it was not sanctified for all future times. And as a result, when they came back from Babel and they weren't able to conquer it, so then it was not subject to being treated as if it was in the land of Israel. And so as a result, these areas were left unsanctified so that the poor would have something to rely on during the 7th year. So the bottom line is that, whether, it's unclear whether this suggests that maybe it was intentional but that maybe they just weren't able to conquer it. But the bottom line is that this was not land that was the sanctification was continued when Israel came back to the land, to Canaan, after the Korban Bayis Rishon, in order to build the Bayis Sheni. And so as a result, that's why it was not considered part of Israel, even though if one were to ask, were Ammon and Moab considered part of Israel when the Jewish people left Egypt, the answer would have been yes. Okay, so that was rule number 2. Now rule number 3, Umakablan Gerim Karduyim Tarmodim. Right, so we're going to take converts from the Karduyim and the Tarmodim. So Aini, is that really true that we don't that we accept them as converts? Vahatani Rami Bar Yecheskel. Rami Bar Yecheskel taught the following brisa: Ein mekabel gerim min our Karduyim. We don't actually accept converts from Karduyim. So Amarav Ashi Kartuyim Itmar. No. Rami Bar Yecheskel was talking about Kartuyim, not Karduyim. And so as a result, Kada Amri Inshi, Kartuyim Psulim, right? That's what people would say. I say it all the time. The Kartuyim are not are puzzled. They're not allowed to be the Jewish people. And so as a result, the Kartuyim, were in fact, considered to be mamzerim, and so as a result, they were not allowed to convert to Judaism because there was a concern that in fact they were in fact mamzerim. So for Ikadamrim, we can also a different version of this same conversation, which gets to the same point, but will be a slightly different. So Tani Rami Bar Yecheskel, Ein Mekabel Gerim Min HaKartuyim. It said, in this situation, he reads it correctly, that the Kartuyim were not allowed to take converts. My lav, Hainu Kartuyim, Hainu Karduyim. Oh, I would have thought that the Kartuyim and the Karduyim are in fact the exact same people. So Amar Rav Ashi, no, they're not exactly the same people. Kartuye l'chud v'karduye l'chud. Each of them is their own group. And the Kartuyim are the ones that are puzzled. They're not allowed to convert. So Rabbi Yochanan b'Sabiyah the Amri Tarbayu. So now we're going to have an alternative view with respect to this question about conversion, and this time it'll be about the Tarmodim. So ein makabim gerim in a Tarmodim. So apparently Rabbi Yochanan and Sabya both said that you can't have converts from the Tarmodim. Now, when so Tosfos asks a very reasonable question, if we take a look at the top of Tet Zayin Amabet, so we have to turn the daf just for a moment to get to this Tosfos. So Rabbi Yochanan v'Savya Amrei ein makabim gerim min tarmodim. Tema Heki Pali Rabbi Yochanan Chagai Hanavi. How are they arguing on Chagai Hanavi? So the answer is V'Shem Asavar Rabbi Yochanan Shelo Amra Chagai Ma'olam. So the point is that they're not arguing with an affirmative statement of Chagai, but the Navi, but rather they would argue on whether or not he said it. If he in fact had said it, so then they wouldn't be able to argue with him. But the question is did he in fact say it? Okay, so that's answers the important question of how we could potentially have that opinion. But Umi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Haki, 1 second. Did Rabbi Yochanan really say that you're not allowed to accept converts from the Tarmodim? V'Hatzanan, 1 second, we have a Mishnah. Kol haKasamim haBoim min haRekem Tahorim. When it comes to bloodstains, so now we have to just if they are in the place Rekem, so then they're considered tahor. Now, let's just back up and remind ourselves of a variety of halachot that we will learn eventually when we get to Hilchos Nida. That when you have a blood stain, if the stain is from a woman who is Jewish, so then it can convey tuma. But a bloodstain from a woman who is not Jewish, it will not convey tuma. And so the question is, are the people in Rechem considered Jewish? And so we see from here that the stains that are on a garment that came from Rechem, which is the name of a place, they are considered tahor. Rabbi Yehuda mitame mimneshehem gerim b'toim. But Rabbi Yehuda says, no, these people converted to Judaism, and then they sort of left. And as you know, they don't. There's no leaving Judaism. You can't convert out. And so as a result, they were really still Jewish. And as a result, the stains that are on their garments would have to be treated as tamei. So mibein ha'ovdei kochavim tahorim. However, if the garment comes from people who are idolaters, meaning people who are not Jewish or never were Jewish, so then they are considered tahor. And then in detailing this or analyzing this Mishnah, what was said, and we turn now to Zayin Amabet, Kapasuk Batani. We said specifically Mibein ha'ovdei kochavim, if it's from idolaters, implying Va'afilum in Tarmod. We said that would imply that even people from Tarmod. So that would suggest that Tarmod are assumed to be idolaters, assumed to be non-Jewish. And so we see Rabbi Yochanan says, and that's why we accept converts from Tarmod. Oh, we accept converts from Tarmod? 1 second. Rabbi Yochanan and Sabya were the ones who said, Ein makabim gerim min Tarmodim. We don't accept converts from Tarmod. So how? This is completely inconsistent. Zos below Svirale. And if you want to say, maybe Rabbi Yochanan was saying that this is just according to the Mishnah, and in fact, Rabbi Yochanan did not agree with it, but in fact, Rabbi Yochanan said that converts may not be accepted from Tarmod. Rabbi Yochanan, halacha kistam Mishnah. No, that doesn't work, because the stam part of the Mishnah, namely that bein ha'ovdei kochavim tahorim, which is something that everybody agrees with. So Rabbi Yochanan says that the halacha is like that. So it must be that the halacha is that the Tarmodim are allowed to marry, are allowed to convert. So as a result, we still have the contradiction. So now where the Gemara explains, Amurai ninhu va'aliba de Rabbi Yochanan. So in fact, these two statements of Rabbi Yochanan were taught by conflicting Amoraim in his name. And so the answer is that we have two different approaches. The first is to say that in fact the people from Tarmod are not able to convert, and that's again because he did not think that Chagai had actually said Tarmod in his ruling. And the second opinion says no, the Tarmodim are allowed to convert, And indeed, the reason that we know that they must be allowed to convert is because the second view of Rabbi Yochanan says that the halacha is like a stam mishnah, and so here we have a stam mishnah that says that idolaters are considered the stains of idolaters are considered tahor, and we know that Tarmod is a place of idolaters, and so as a result, it must be that the people in Tarmod are able to convert. So okay. So mitarmod, my time alo. Now, what was the whole reason that we might have thought that the people in Tarmod are not able to convert? So pligi be Rabbi Yochanan v'Sabia. So Rabbi Yochanan and Sabia, the two people who said that you can't convert, they gave each their own reasons. Chad amar mishum avdei shlomo, v'chad amar mishum benos Yerushalayim. So one says it relates to the slaves from Shlomo, and one says that it relates to Benos Yerushalayim. So Benos Yerushalayim, we're going to have to explain. But what is the meaning of the slaves of Shlomo? So these were the slaves that Shlomo used to help, that he had due to his great wealth. But it turned out that eventually they themselves these slaves somehow became wealthy on their own, and because of that, their wealth, they ended up marrying Jewish women, and so as a result, because this opinion says that the marriage between a Jewish slave, a non-Jewish slave, a Canaanite slave, and a Jewish woman results in the children being considered a mamzer, and so this differs from the opinion that, of course, Haggai taught. But this is a separate opinion that says that kind of relationship can result in a mamzer status, and so as a result, that's why they weren't allowed. So so we have to explain that. So according to the one who says that it was because of the servants of Shlomo. So kasabra ovid kochavim ve'ebed haba al bas Yisrael havlad mamzer. The reason is that the explanation is that if a non-Jewish person has relations with a Jew, whether that non-Jewish person is just a plain idolater or a slave, that child is considered a mamzer. So Tosfos here asks an interesting question. Why did you need to actually say that that it was a mamzer? Vim Tomer Lamali. This is the first of the Tosfos in the wide lines. Vim Tomer Lamali Lamisle time mishum mamzeris haba. Habale Lamemar mishum avdei Shlomo de avadim asurim b'Yisraelis. You could just say that they are slaves, and a slave, a non-Jewish slave, is not allowed to marry a Jew. So why do you have to say that, in fact, that there's anything else that's involved? It's simple. You don't have to say that they're mamzerim. So v'yesh lomar demistamanis yashu habala mehem, that at some point the owners had given up hope for ever retaining or retrieving the ownership of these slaves, and so as a result, through that yeyush, that they actually became free, and as a result, that therefore the question, the problem is that they would actually because of them being non-Jewish, and they would actually never have finished the conversion, and so as a result, they would not be allowed to, because their children having married Jewish women would result in mamzerim, and so that has to be the reason why they are not able to convert. So okay, so we'll stop there on that issue. So Ella, but now back into the Gemara. So the question is, Ella Lamanda Amar Mishum Benos Yerushalayim. So Maihi, what's the problem with respect to the Beno Yerushalayim? and so again, we're 1, 2, 3, 5 lines up in the narrow lines in the Gemara. So pligi ba Rav Yosef or Rabbanan. So there's a machlokas between the Rav Yosef and the Rabbanan. The Tarvayu Mishmei de Rabba Bar Chana, and both of them were teaching their rule in the name of Rabba Bar Chana. So Chara Mar Tresar Alfe Gavre Vishita Alfe Shtuye. One of them said that there were 12,000 soldiers and 6,000 archers, and another 6,000 archers, so a total of 18,000 armed forces. And one of them said that it was 12,000 men, 6,000 of whom were archers, and the other 6,000 were foot soldiers. And what happened? When the idolaters came to destroy the Beit HaMikdash, everybody turned to try and capture the gold and silver from the Beit HaMikdash. However, they instead turned to the daughters of Yerushalayim. Shneamar, as we say in the end of Eicha, Nashim b'Tzion inu b'sulos ba'ara Yehuda. Right, so they ravaged women in Zion, the maidens in the towns of Yehuda. So the point is that the Navi in Eicha says that in fact the Jewish women were violated, and so as a result, it's their offspring who became mamzerim, and that's why the people in Tarmod were not allowed to marry. And again, this is all based. Everybody could agree on the story, and the question is, do these relationships actually cause a problem? Indeed, Tosfos asks actually an interesting question, and notes that in fact there is no biblical prohibition for a non-Jew to marry a Jew or to have relations with a Jew. So how is it possible that this could result in a free non-Jew and a free Jew? How is it possible that it could result in a mamzer? And so the Tosfos answers that the answer that I particularly appreciate in Tosfos, one is a possibility is that it's just a rabbinic mamzera status. But the first answer of Tosfos, and the one answer that Tosfos likes best, is to suggest that in fact the issue is that marriage does not exist between a Jew and a non-Jew. And so as a result, since marriage does not exist, it is not the sin that causes the mamzer status, but rather the absence of a marriage taking hold. And so according to this opinion, the absence of a marriage taking hold, that in and of itself is sufficient to cause a mamzer status. And so that's the explanation that Tosfos offers. And again, machlokas, and indeed we don't paskin that way, but it's interesting to think about nonetheless. Okay, so now we cited the pasuk Nar Hayisi, and so the Gemara goes back to that pasuk to try and understand who was it that said this statement. So Amar Rabbi Yishmuel Bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonasan. So pasuk zeh Sar Ha'olam Amro, right? It must be that the minister of the world said this pasuk. Nara Isi Gam Zakanti, right? The total pasuk says, right? I've been young and I've been old. I have not seen a righteous man forsaken, nor his children begging for bread. So manam, right? So and now I'm going to show you how do I know that it had to be Sar Ha'olam, because because if you say it was actually God and not just some angel, and not an angel. So me ika zikna kameh, is there any kind of concept of old age for God? Of course not. Well, David Amra, you want to say that maybe it was David himself who said it? Mi kashish kulei hai, was he that old? Now, two ways to understand this. One is that he lived to 70, and so of course, that's not actually that long a time. And so in the grand scheme of the world, and so as a result, maybe during his 70 years, he didn't see anybody being forsaken, or the children of a righteous person begging for bread. But in the grand scheme of things, it would happen. So alternatively, one can explain that David died at the age of 70 on his birthday. And we say in Perkei Avos, in Parakeh, Mishnah Kaf Aleph, that in fact old age begins at 70. So David, arguably never actually got to really old age. He hit it, and that was it. So, I guess he could have said it on his last day, but he was never really formally old. And so as a result, it makes a lot of sense to say that, it couldn't have been him who was the original source for this statement. So Ella Shema Mina Sarha Olam Amro. So it must be, in fact, the angel who ministers the world. That's the one who said it, because that's the oldest thing that could be considered old. So so we have another statement again of Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani in the name of Rabbi Yonasan. This one connects to the earlier one because we're going to reference Ammon and Moab, right? So we had talked about the halacha of Ammon and Moab, the land that they were on. So now we're going to connect them in connection with the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash as well. So we're going to actually tie together two different things. One is the halachos of Ammon and Moab that we mentioned earlier with respect to their land. So that we've already mentioned them, so we want to raise that issue. And in addition, we're now going to reference the destruction of the Beit Hamikdash and people turning aside to do something other than plunder. And so that's also relevant to our conversation. So let's take a look. So my dichsiv, what does it mean when it says in Eicha, in the first parak of Eicha, Yado paras sar al komach hamadeha, the enemy spread out his hand on all her treasures. Ze Ammon and Moab, right? This refers to Ammon and Moab. B'shash nechnasu ovdei kokavim laheichal, at the time that the idolaters came into the Beit Hamikdash, into the building of the Beit Hamikdash. Hakol nivnu al kesef v'zahav. Everybody was focused on the gold and the silver, and the gold. V'heim nivnu al sefer Torah, but they turned to the Torah itself, to the Torah scroll. Why? Amru zeh shekazabo lo yavo Ammoni u'Moabi b'kal Hashem yisaref b'eish. They were very jealous. They know that the halacha is that somebody from Ammon and Moab is not allowed to convert to Judaism, and so they wanted to burn the Torah in response. So now that we've taught one halacha that really was related to some of the discussions that we just had, we'll reference another pasuk in that first parak of Eicha. Tziva Hashem liYaakov tzvivav tzarav. Again, Hashem has decreed regarding Yaakov that those who surround him should be his adversaries. So Amarav could go Homania lefum nahara, right? So this is like Homania, the people of Homania, they act towards the Jews in Pum Nahara. So Pum Nahara is a Jewish town. And Rashi explains, 1, 2, 3, 6, 9 lines up in the narrow lines of Rashi at the end of Rashi. So Homania lefum nahara. The Humanya Yevanim Haim. In Humanya there were Greeks, Umatsirin Libnei Pum Nahara, and they would be pains in the behind for the people in Pum Nahara. Shehem Yisrael Aniyim, because they were very poor Jewish people. So interestingly, the note here notes the fact that, according to the Aruch LaNer, that in Kedushin there's a similar passage, but Rashi actually says not that they were Yevanim, but rather they were Ammonim. And of course, that makes a lot more sense because that would be consistent with the topic that we were just talking about. So most likely, so the Aruch LaNer suggests that in fact this is a copy error in Rashi, and that really this should be Ammonim. And so again, the idea being that the Ammonim have it in for the Jewish people, and it all of course cites back, as we saw a couple of weeks ago, that it all is based on the refusal of the people in Ammon and Moab to offer the Jewish people food, and that as a result, that's why they lost their ability to convert to Judaism. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Asi. So now we'll deal with this last one more halacha in connection with mamzerim. What about today? If a non-Jew marries a Jew in today, we have to be suspicious that maybe it was a valid marriage. Because maybe this non-Jew is actually from the 10 tribes, the 10 lost tribes. One second. One second. We have a general rule that if something comes out of a big pot and you got 1,000 jelly beans and only 100 of the jelly beans are not kosher, and you take out one of the jelly beans, you're allowed to eat it because we assume that whatever came out of the group of jelly beans came out from the majority. So 1 second. So bedukta the kavi. No. So Rashi. We're talking about a place where they settled. So now the two different understandings of this. So Rashi's understanding is B'nai Aseres. Take a look in the last Rashi on the daf, and with this and Tosfos will conclude. So B'nai Aseres Hashvatim v'kol kavua d'maktzal maktzad dami. That any time you have fixed locations. So now you went in and you're not sure which store you went into. So as a result, we say that it's a 50-50 chance as to where you went. And so so that the idea is that when you have something that has a fixed location associated with it, so we have this concept of kol kavua k'maktzal maktzadami. So as a result, we have to treat the non-Jews in that particular place where the 10 tribes settled as if every individual is potentially a 50% Jewish. But Tosfos points out, that doesn't work, because as soon as the non-Jew goes out of their house, so then it's no longer, then it's as if it was separated. And we say that called a parish, meruba parish. So it's got to be. So Tosfos changes the understanding and says, no, the understanding is that in these particular locations, bedukta de kivi means that in these particular locations, the people from the descendants of the 10 tribes are the majority. And so that's why if somebody non-Jewish, if from those locations comes and marries a Jewish woman, so in those locations, we need to be concerned. So where are those locations? So for that, you need to stay tuned tomorrow. So we'll conclude there, and we'll pick up with the second to last line of Het Zion and Bet, God willing, tomorrow.
Thank you, David. It's this is a welcome digression from the
yes,
the relationships of Yevamos.
Yes, a little less head spinning. So I probably could have gone a little faster, but this was a really enjoyable, as all dafim are really enjoyable, but really enjoyable in a nice way to go through it in detail. So have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.